The winter morning light filtered through the tall windows of Adelaide Cottage, casting gentle shadows across the breakfast table where Catherine sat with her steaming cup of tea. Snow had fallen during the night, blanketing the grounds in pristine white, creating the perfect Christmas card scene she had always dreamed of for her children. The house felt different this year, quieter in some ways, yet fuller of meaning than it had ever been before. Catherine gazed out at the garden where George, Charlotte, and Louis were already building what appeared to be an ambitious snowman, their laughter echoing through the crisp December air. At 15, George had grown tall and lean, his father's features becoming more pronounced with each passing month. He was patiently helping 8-year-old Louis pack snow while 13-year-old Charlotte directed the entire operation with the confidence of someone who had inherited both her grandmother's determination and her mother's organizational skills. The sight filled Catherine's heart with a warmth that had nothing to do with the cup in her hands. This Christmas would be different from all the others. Not because of any grand gestures or elaborate celebrations, but because of something far more precious, the simple, unguarded moments of togetherness that had become increasingly rare in their lives. William appeared in the doorway, still in his pajamas and robe, his hair tousled from sleep. Even after all these years of marriage, Catherine felt that familiar flutter when she saw him first thing in the morning, before the weight of duty and responsibility settled on his shoulders for the day. "Good morning, my love," he said, bending to kiss the top of her head before settling into the chair beside her. "The children are up early. They've been excited about today for weeks," Catherine replied, watching as Charlotte attempted to lift Louis up to place a carrot nose on their snowman. "I don't think any of them slept much last night." William followed her gaze to the window and smiled. "Do you remember when we used to worry about giving them a normal childhood? Look at them now, completely absorbed in building the world's most structurally questionable snowman." Catherine laughed, the sound light and genuine. "I think we've done better than we hoped. They're just children. Happy children." The past year had been transformative for their family in ways Catherine was only beginning to understand. The challenges they had faced together, the moments of uncertainty and of fear, had somehow brought them closer rather than pulling them apart. There had been times when Catherine wondered if they would emerge stronger, but, watching her children play in the snow while her husband sat beside her in comfortable morning quiet, she knew they had not just survived, they had discovered something deeper about what it meant to be a family. "I have something to show you," Catherine said, reaching for the envelope that had been sitting beside her plate. Inside were the photographs from their recent family portrait session, the ones she had been both excited and nervous to see. The photographer, a gentle woman named Sarah whom Catherine had worked with before, had captured something magical. The images showed not the formal, perfectly posed royal family that the public was accustomed to seeing, but something far more intimate and real. There was George with his arm casually thrown around Louis's shoulders, both of them grinning at something off camera. Charlotte sat on the ground in front of them, her hands folded in her lap, but her eyes sparkling with barely contained laughter. And then, there was the photograph that had made Catherine's breath catch when she first saw it. William stood behind her, his hands resting gently on her shoulders, while she sat with her hands clasped in her lap. But it wasn't their poses that made the image so powerful, it was the expression on their faces. William was looking down at Catherine with such unmistakable love and pride that it seemed to radiate from the photograph itself. And Catherine was looking directly at the camera with a serene confidence that spoke of a woman who had found her strength in the love of her family. "These are beautiful, Catherine," William said softly, studying each photograph carefully. "Sarah has captured something. I'm not sure I can put it into words." "She's captured us," Catherine replied simply. "Not the Prince and Princess of Wales, not the future King and Queen, but us. William and Catherine. Mum and Dad." William reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers as they had done thousands of times before. "Is this the photograph you want to share for Christmas?" Catherine nodded, pointing to the image of all 5 of them together. In it, they were seated on a simple bench in the gardens of their home, with no elaborate backdrop or formal staging. The children were arranged naturally around them, George standing tall behind the bench, Charlotte perched on the arm beside Catherine, and Louis leaning against William's knee. They were all looking at the camera, but their expressions were relaxed, genuine, filled with the kind of happiness that couldn't be manufactured or posed. "I want people to see this," Catherine said. "I want them to see that despite everything we've been through, despite all the challenges and changes, we're still here. We're still together. We're still a family who loves each other." The decision to share such an intimate portrait hadn't been easy. Catherine understood the fine line between offering the public a glimpse into their private world and maintaining the boundaries that protected her children's childhood. But something about this photograph felt different. It felt like a gift she could give not just to the people who had supported them through difficult times, but to anyone who might need a reminder that love and family could weather any storm. "The children will need to understand what this means," William said thoughtfully. "Sharing this photograph will invite attention, commentary, speculation." "They understand more than we sometimes give them credit for," Catherine replied. "George especially has been watching how we handle things, learning from what he sees. And Charlotte, she has such a strong sense of family. She knows that sometimes we share parts of ourselves because it helps other people feel less alone." As if summoned by their conversation, the back door burst open and 3 snow-covered children tumbled inside, bringing with them the scent of winter air and the sound of breathless excitement. "Mummy, Daddy, you have to come see," Louis exclaimed, tugging at Catherine's sleeve with mittened hands. "Our snowman is taller than George." "That's not possible," George protested, pulling off his hat and shaking snow from his dark hair. "I measured it myself." "Children," Catherine said gently, "boots off first, then hot chocolate, then we'll all go admire your masterpiece." As her family bustled around her, William helping Louis with his snow boots, Charlotte chattering about their plans for Christmas Eve, George already reaching for the hot chocolate mix, Catherine felt a profound sense of gratitude. This was what she wanted to capture and share. Not the grandeur of royal life, but the beautiful ordinariness of family love. The morning passed in a blur of hot chocolate, Christmas music, and excited planning for the evening ahead. They had decided to spend Christmas Eve at Adelaide Cottage, just the 5 of them, before joining the extended royal family for the traditional Christmas Day celebrations at Sandringham. It was a compromise that allowed them to maintain their own family traditions while honoring the larger obligations of their roles. As lunchtime approached, Catherine found herself in her study, looking once again at the photographs spread across her desk. Each image told a story, but the family portrait seemed to contain all their stories, past, present, and future. It showed a family who had faced uncertainty together and emerged not unscathed, but unbroken. It showed children who were growing up with love and security despite the unique pressures of their position. It showed a marriage that had deepened and strengthened through challenge rather than being diminished by it. When she had first married William, Catherine had struggled to find her place in the royal family, to understand how to be herself while fulfilling the expectations of her role. Now, looking at this photograph, she could see clearly who she had become, not just the Princess of Wales, but a woman who had learned to lead with her heart while never forgetting her duty. The photograph would be released that afternoon, accompanied by a simple message wishing everyone a peaceful and joyful Christmas. Catherine had written and rewritten the message several times before settling on something that felt authentic to who they were as a family, wishing everyone a Christmas filled with love, laughter, and the warmth of family. "Thank you for your continued support and kindness. William, Catherine, George, Charlotte and Louis." It wasn't eloquent or elaborate, but it was true. And Catherine had learned that truth, even in its simplicity, had a power that no amount of careful crafting could match. As she prepared to join her family for lunch, Catherine took one last look at the photograph. Tomorrow, it would belong to the world, analyzed and discussed and interpreted in countless ways. But today, it was still theirs, a moment captured in time that showed exactly who they were when no one was watching, when they were simply a family who loved each other deeply and completely. The afternoon sun was beginning to cast longer shadows across the snow-covered garden, and Catherine could hear William calling the children in for lunch. Soon, they would gather around their table, and the day would continue with all the small, precious moments that made up a family's life together. But, first, she allowed herself one more moment to sit in the quiet of her study, holding the photograph that would soon carry their love out into the world, hoping it might bring comfort to someone, somewhere, who needed to be reminded that even in the darkest times, love endures. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor to Adelaide Cottage. Catherine was in the kitchen, preparing ingredients for their traditional Christmas Eve dinner, when she heard the familiar sound of tires on gravel. Through the window, she watched as a sleek black car pulled up the drive, and her heart lifted when she recognized the figure stepping out into the winter air. It was her mother, Carol Middleton, carrying a large wicker basket and wearing the warm smile that had been Catherine's source of comfort for as long as she could remember. Behind her came Michael, Catherine's father, his arms full of wrapped presents that he was trying to balance while navigating the snowy path. "Granny and Grandpa are here." Charlotte's voice rang out from somewhere upstairs, followed by the thunder of 3 sets of feet racing down the staircase. Catherine wiped her hands on her apron and hurried to the front door, arriving just as her parents were being enthusiastically greeted by their grandchildren. The sight of her family together like this, spanning 3 generations, filled her with the same sense of completion she had felt looking at the family photograph that morning. "Mum, I thought you weren't coming until tomorrow," Catherine said, embracing her mother warmly. "We couldn't stay away," Carol replied, her eyes twinkling as she watched George attempting to peek into the basket she was carrying. "Besides, I brought your father's Christmas pudding, and he was convinced it would somehow be less perfect if we waited until tomorrow to deliver it." Michael Middleton rolled his eyes good-naturedly as he set down the presents. "Your mother makes it sound like I'm obsessive about my pudding recipe." "You are obsessive about your pudding recipe, Grandpa," Charlotte said with the brutal honesty that only a 13-year-old could deliver. The laughter that followed seemed to fill every corner of the cottage, and Catherine realized how much she had needed this, the easy, uncomplicated joy of family gathering without ceremony or agenda. William appeared from his study, drawn by the sound of voices, and soon they were all crowded into the sitting room, the fire crackling in the hearth while Carol distributed homemade mince pies from her mysterious basket. "Tell me about this photograph I keep hearing about," Carol said to Catherine as they settled into the comfortable chaos of family conversation. George was showing Michael something on his phone, while William helped Louis open what appeared to be an early Christmas gift, a beautifully crafted wooden airplane that Michael had clearly spent hours making in his workshop. Catherine felt a flutter of nervousness. She had told her parents about the photograph over the phone, but seeing their reaction to the actual image would be different. She retrieved the prints from her study and handed them to her mother, watching carefully as Carol's expression shifted from curiosity to something deeper. "Oh, Catherine," her mother said softly, studying the family portrait with the careful attention she had always given to things that mattered. This is exactly who you are." "What do you mean?" Catherine asked, settling beside her mother on the sofa. Carol held up the photograph so Michael could see it, and Catherine watched her father's face transform as he took in the image. After a long moment, he looked at Catherine with the same expression of pride and love that had steadied her through every important moment of her life. "Your mother means that this photograph shows the woman we raised," he said simply. "Strong, loving, completely yourself. We always wondered if you would be able to stay true to who you are in this life you've chosen." This photograph answers that question beautifully. The weight of her father's words settled over Catherine like a warm blanket. She had spent so many years wondering if she was doing enough, being enough, fulfilling the expectations that came with her role. But, looking at her parents' faces as they studied the photograph, she realized that the most important approval had always been right here, not in the headlines or the public opinion polls, but in the eyes of the people who had loved her first and longest. "The children look so natural," Carol observed, passing the photograph to William. "How did you manage that?" "Usually, the moment someone points a camera at them, they either freeze up or start performing. Sarah has a gift, Catherine explained. She spent an hour just talking with them before she took any photographs. By the time we were ready to start, they had forgotten she was there. She captured them just being themselves. That's the secret, isn't it? William said, studying the image with fresh eyes. The best photographs aren't about perfect poses or flawless lighting. They're about capturing truth. The conversation was interrupted by Louis, who had abandoned his new airplane in favor of climbing onto Catherine's lap. At 7 years old, he was still young enough to seek comfort in physical closeness, and Catherine treasured these moments, knowing they would become fewer as he grew older. "Mummy," he said, his voice carrying the seriousness that children reserved for their most important questions. "Are we going to be in magazines again?" The room grew quiet. Even George and Charlotte, who had been engaged in animated conversation with their grandfather, turned their attention to their younger brother's question. Catherine felt the familiar weight of responsibility not just to answer honestly, but to help her children understand their unique position in the world without burdening them with fears or expectations beyond their years. "The photograph will be shared, yes," Catherine said carefully. "People like to see our family, especially at Christmas time. But it will be shared because we want to share it, not because anyone is making us." "Will people say nice things?" Charlotte asked, her question carrying an awareness that sometimes surprised Catherine with its maturity. "Most people will," William answered. "Some people might not understand why we shared it, or they might wish we had done something differently. But we can't control what other people think or say. We can only control why we do things and how we treat each other." "I think it's a nice photograph," George said quietly. He had reached the age where he was acutely aware of their public role, and Catherine had noticed him paying more attention to media coverage and public reaction to their activities. "We look happy." "That's good, isn't it? For people to see that we're happy?" Catherine exchanged a look with William, both of them recognizing the thoughtfulness in their eldest son's response. George was beginning to understand not just the privileges of his position, but the responsibilities that came with it, the way their family's happiness could offer comfort or hope to others, and the delicate balance between sharing enough to maintain that connection while protecting enough to preserve their privacy and security. "It is good," Catherine agreed. "Sometimes people who are going through difficult times need to be reminded that families can be strong and happy together. Sometimes a photograph like this can help someone feel less alone." The afternoon melted into evening as they continued to share stories and laughter. Carol helped Catherine in the kitchen while the children showed Michael and William their latest art projects and school assignments. The cottage filled with the comfortable sounds of family life, conversations overlapping, occasional bursts of laughter, the gentle clatter of dishes being prepared for dinner. As they gathered around the dining table for their Christmas Eve meal, Catherine looked around at the faces illuminated by candlelight and felt a profound sense of gratitude. Her children were growing up surrounded not just by love, but by the knowledge that they were part of something larger than themselves, a family that extended beyond their immediate household to include grandparents who adored them, cousins they would see tomorrow, and a broader community of people who cared about their well-being. The meal itself was simple but perfect: roasted chicken that Michael carved with great ceremony, vegetables from Carol's garden that she had preserved specially for this dinner, and the traditional Christmas pudding that had prompted their visit. As they ate, conversation flowed easily between topics both mundane and meaningful. Charlotte shared her excitement about a school project on medieval history. George talked about his plans for the school holidays and his hopes for the cricket season ahead. Louis entertained everyone with a detailed account of his snowman building strategy. But it was the quieter moments that Catherine treasured most: the way William's hand found hers under the table, the way her mother caught her eye and smiled when the children weren't looking, the way her father listened with complete attention to even Louis's most rambling stories. These were the moments that the photograph had captured, the love that existed in the spaces between words, in glances shared and hands held, and the simple presence of people who had chosen to show up for each other, again and again, through all of life's changes and challenges. After dinner, as they moved back to the sitting room for coffee and the exchange of a few Christmas Eve gifts, Catherine's phone buzzed with a message from their communications team. The photograph had been released an hour ago, and the initial response was overwhelmingly positive. Messages of support and gratitude were pouring in from around the world, from people touched by the image's warmth and authenticity. Catherine showed the message to William, and they shared a quiet moment of satisfaction. They had trusted their instincts about sharing something so personal, and it seemed that trust had been well placed. But, more than the public response, Catherine was grateful for this evening, for the reminder that the love shown in that photograph was real and present, not just captured in a moment but living and breathing in every day of their lives together. As the evening wound down and her parents prepared to head home to their nearby cottage, Catherine hugged each of them tightly, feeling the security that had always come from their unconditional love and support. Tomorrow would bring the larger family gathering, the public responsibilities of Christmas Day, and the return to their roles as senior members of the royal family. But tonight had been theirs, a perfect Christmas Eve filled with the kind of simple, precious moments that made all the challenges worthwhile. Christmas morning arrived with a symphony of whispered excitement and muffled footsteps as the children attempted to creep downstairs without waking their parents. Catherine had been awake for several minutes, listening to their careful navigation of the old cottage's creaking floorboards, when William's arm tightened around her waist and she felt his quiet laughter against her shoulder. "Should we let them suffer a bit longer, or put them out of their misery?" he murmured into her hair. "Give them 2 more minutes," Catherine whispered back. "Charlotte's probably trying to organize a strategy session in the hallway." True to prediction, they could hear their daughter's authoritative whisper directing her brothers on the proper protocol for Christmas morning gift opening. At 13, Charlotte had appointed herself the family's unofficial coordinator for special occasions, a role she took seriously and executed with impressive efficiency. When Catherine and William finally made their appearance downstairs, they found their children arranged on the sofa with careful patience, though Louis was practically vibrating with excitement. The Christmas tree, which they had decorated together just a few days earlier, stood in the corner surrounded by carefully wrapped packages that seemed to have multiplied overnight. "Father Christmas came," Louis announced unnecessarily, pointing to the obviously emptied stockings hanging by the fireplace. "Did he indeed?" William replied with mock surprise, settling into his favorite chair while Catherine curled up on the sofa beside Charlotte. "I wonder if he remembered what everyone asked for." The next hour passed in a blur of wrapping paper, delighted squeals, and the comfortable chaos that came with watching children discover that their most hoped-for gifts had actually appeared under the tree. George unwrapped a professional quality camera, his eyes widening as he examined the various lenses and attachments that came with it. Charlotte found the art supplies she had been coveting, along with several books about famous female artists throughout history. Louis discovered a collection of wooden trains to add to the railway system that had been growing in his bedroom for the past 2 years. But it was the gifts they gave each other that touched Catherine's heart most deeply. George had spent weeks working on a photo album filled with pictures he had taken throughout the year, candid shots of family life that captured moments Catherine hadn't even realized he had noticed. Charlotte presented her with a hand-painted picture frame, decorated with intricate flowers and designed specifically to hold the family photograph they had taken. William's gift was a leather-bound journal, beautiful in its simplicity, with her initials embossed on the cover. "For all the thoughts and feelings you're always processing," he explained as she ran her fingers over the smooth leather. "Sometimes it helps to write them down." Catherine's gifts to her family reflected the intimacy of their relationships, a vintage cricket bat for George that she had found at an antique shop, knowing he would appreciate both its history and its potential for future games with his father. For Charlotte, a subscription to an art history course at a prestigious gallery, along with the promise of monthly mother-daughter visits to see the exhibitions. Louis received a handmade treasure map that Catherine had spent evenings creating, complete with clues that would lead him on adventures around their various homes. For William, she had commissioned a portrait artist to create a painting based on one of her favorite photographs, the 5 of them during a private family holiday the previous summer, completely relaxed and unguarded. It wasn't meant for public display, but for his study, where he could look at it during difficult days and remember who he was beyond his official duties. As they finished opening gifts and settled into the comfortable aftermath of Christmas morning, children playing with new toys, parents cleaning up wrapping paper and sharing coffee, Catherine's phone began to buzz with messages about the family photograph they had shared the day before. The response had been even more overwhelming than expected, with people from around the world sharing their own family stories and expressing gratitude for the openness and vulnerability the image represented. "Listen to this," Catherine said, reading from one of the messages that had been forwarded to her by their communications team. "A woman from Australia wrote that seeing our photograph helped her realize she needed to forgive her own family after a long estrangement. She's planning to call her sister today for the first time in 5 years." William paused in his collection of discarded ribbons. "Really?" "There are dozens of messages like this," Catherine continued, scrolling through her phone. "People saying the photograph reminded them what family love looks like, or gave them hope during difficult times with their own children, or inspired them to reach out to relatives they hadn't spoken to in years." The weight of that response settled over both of them. They had hoped the photograph might bring joy or comfort to people during the Christmas season, but the depth of emotional connection it had sparked was beyond anything they had anticipated. "Mummy, what are you reading?" Charlotte asked, looking up from the sketchpad where she was already experimenting with her new colored pencils. "Messages from people who saw our family photograph," Catherine explained. "People are sharing stories about their own families and how the picture made them feel." "Good feelings or sad feelings?" Louis wanted to know, abandoning his train set to climb onto William's lap. "Good feelings," William assured him. "Happy feelings. Some people saw our photograph and decided to call their grandparents or their brothers and sisters to wish them Merry Christmas." George lowered his new camera, which he had been examining with intense focus. "So sharing the picture actually helped people?" "It seems like it did," Catherine replied. "Sometimes when people see that other families love each other and stick together, it reminds them that they can work through problems in their own families too." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their security team, a gentle reminder that soon they would need to begin preparing for the journey to Sandringham and the more formal aspects of their Christmas celebration. But Catherine was grateful for this quiet morning, for the opportunity to process the response to their photograph in the safety and privacy of their own home, surrounded by the people who mattered most. The drive to Sandringham passed peacefully, with the children alternately excited about seeing their cousins and drowsy from the early morning and sugar crash that inevitably followed Christmas gift opening. Catherine watched the familiar countryside roll past and thought about the different worlds they inhabited, the intimate family life they had just left behind at Adelaide Cottage, and the more formal royal environment they were entering. Both worlds were real, both were important, and she had finally learned to navigate between them without losing herself in the transition. The family photograph represented the bridge between those worlds, a glimpse of their private life that they could share authentically while still maintaining the boundaries that protected what was most precious to them. When they arrived at Sandringham, they were greeted by the organized chaos that came with gathering the entire extended royal family for Christmas. Cousins were reunited, presents exchanged, and stories shared about Christmas mornings in different households. Catherine watched her children slip seamlessly into the larger family dynamic, their confidence and security in their own relationships allowing them to embrace the broader celebration without anxiety or performance. The king approached Catherine during a quiet moment in the afternoon, when most of the family had gathered in the drawing room for tea and the children were engaged in an elaborate game of charades. "I saw the photograph you shared yesterday," he said, his voice carrying the warmth that had become more frequent in their interactions over recent years. "It was beautifully done. Genuine and heartfelt." "Thank you," Catherine replied. It felt important to share something real, especially after everything we've all been through this year. The response has been remarkable, he continued. My private secretary mentioned that messages have been pouring in from around the Commonwealth and beyond. People connecting with the image on a very personal level. Catherine nodded, thinking again of the woman from Australia and the dozens of similar stories that had found their way to her throughout the day. I think people are hungry for authenticity, especially from families in the public eye. They want to see that love and stability are possible, even when life is complicated. You've given them that, the king said simply. You've shown them a family that has faced challenges together and emerged stronger rather than broken. That's a powerful gift. The afternoon proceeded with the comfortable rhythms of family tradition, the king's speech preparation, the children's excited chatter about tomorrow's activities, the adults' gentle supervision of increasingly elaborate games and competitions. Catherine found herself moving easily between conversations, feeling more settled in her role within the larger royal family than she had in years past. The success of the morning's photograph had given her confidence not just in their decision to share it, but in her own judgment about when and how to offer glimpses of their private life to the public. She was learning to trust her instincts about what would be helpful rather than simply intrusive, and the positive response confirmed that their family's openness about both their struggles and their joys could indeed serve a larger purpose. As evening approached and they prepared for the traditional Christmas Eve service at St. Mary Magdalene Church, Catherine helped the children change into their more formal clothes. Charlotte needed assistance with the buttons on her coat, and Louis required a complete outfit change after discovering chocolate on his original shirt, while George managed his own preparations with the growing independence that reminded Catherine daily of how quickly he was maturing. Are there going to be lots of people at church? Louis asked as Catherine helped him with his tie. Some people, yes, she replied honestly. People who live nearby and want to attend the Christmas Eve service, and some people who are hoping to see our family. Will they want to take pictures? Charlotte wanted to know. Probably, Catherine admitted. But we'll walk together, and we'll focus on why we're going to celebrate Christmas and to think about what it means to love and take care of each other. As they prepared to leave for church, Catherine caught sight of herself in the mirror and thought about the contrast between this formal evening appearance and the relaxed family portrait they had shared just 24 hours earlier. Both images were true representations of who they were: the formal, public face that came with their official roles, and the private family life that sustained and motivated everything else they did. The family photograph had been an invitation for people to see behind the formal presentations, to understand that their public service grew out of genuine love and commitment to each other. Tonight, as they attended church together and fulfilled their traditional Christmas Eve obligations, they would represent the crown and the continuity it provided. But, underneath those roles, they would always be William and Catherine, George and Charlotte and Louis, a family who had chosen to love each other fully and share that love with a world that seemed increasingly hungry for authentic connection and hope. The walk to St. Mary Magdalene Church on Christmas Eve had become one of Catherine's favorite royal traditions, not for the pageantry or the public attention, but for the simple act of walking together as a family through the crisp winter air. The path from Sandringham House to the church was lined with people who had gathered to offer Christmas greetings, their faces bright with genuine warmth and holiday spirit. As they made their way along the familiar route, Catherine noticed how naturally the children had learned to acknowledge the well-wishers while staying close together as a family unit. George walked beside William, his stride now matching his father's more than it matched hers. Charlotte held Catherine's hand, occasionally waving to children in the crowd who called out to her. Louis, walking between his parents, occasionally broke into small skips of excitement but stayed within the gentle boundaries of appropriate behavior. The response to their family photograph continued to echo in the voices of the people they passed. "Beautiful picture," called out an elderly woman from behind the barrier. "Lovely family," shouted a young father holding his own small daughter on his shoulders. "Thank you for sharing," came from a couple who looked to be about Catherine's age, their faces reflecting the kind of understanding that suggested their own family had weathered challenges together. Inside the church, the candlelight and familiar hymns created an atmosphere of peace that Catherine had come to treasure. This was where she had learned to find solitude even in public spaces, where the ancient words and traditions provided a foundation that remained constant even as everything else in their lives continued to evolve. During the service, she found herself thinking about the messages that had continued to arrive throughout the day in response to their photograph. A grandfather from Scotland had written about being inspired to reach out to grandchildren he rarely saw. A military family stationed overseas had shared how the image reminded them of the importance of staying connected despite distance and deployment. A single mother had expressed gratitude for seeing an example of family strength that gave her hope during her own difficult season. Each message reinforced Catherine's growing understanding that their family's openness about both struggle and joy could serve a purpose beyond their own healing. In choosing to share genuine moments rather than carefully constructed public images, they were offering something that people seemed to need: evidence that love could endure, that families could support each other through difficulty, and that happiness was possible even when life was complicated. After the service, as they made their way back to Sandringham House, Catherine walked beside the Queen Consort, enjoying a rare moment of quiet conversation away from the children's chatter. "The photograph you shared has caused quite a stir," Camilla observed with a smile. "The response has been remarkable." "We hoped it might bring some joy during the Christmas season," Catherine replied. "But the depth of the response has surprised us. People are sharing their own family stories, talking about reconciliation and forgiveness and hope. That's the power of authenticity," Camilla said thoughtfully. "People can sense when something is genuine versus when it's been manufactured for public consumption. What you shared yesterday was real, and people responded to that reality." Catherine nodded, appreciating the older woman's perspective. Camilla had navigated her own journey from private person to public figure, and her understanding of the balance between openness and privacy had deepened over the years. "How do you know when to share and when to protect?" Catherine asked. "I'm still learning to trust my instincts about what will be helpful versus what might be intrusive or inappropriate." "You trust your heart," Camilla replied simply. "You ask yourself why you're sharing something. Is it to serve others, or is it for some other reason? You consider whether it honors your family's privacy while still offering something meaningful. And you remember that you can't control how people respond, only what you choose to give." The conversation was interrupted by Louis, who had run back to them from his position between William and his grandfather. "Mummy, Grandpa Charles says we're having Christmas pudding after dinner tomorrow, and he wants to know if we have a special Christmas wish." Catherine smiled at her youngest son's earnest delivery of the message. "What did you tell him?" "I told him I wished for snow for the whole Christmas holiday, and for everyone in our family to stay happy and healthy," Louis replied seriously. "Those sound like excellent wishes," Catherine agreed, taking his small hand as they continued up the path toward the house. That evening, after the children had been settled into bed with their stockings hung hopefully at the foot of their beds, Catherine found herself in the quiet study that had become her retreat during their stays at Sandringham. William was still downstairs, engaged in conversation with his father and stepmother about upcoming engagements and royal duties for the new year. She pulled out the leather journal he had given her that morning and began to write, trying to capture her thoughts about the day and the unexpected impact of their family photograph. The words came slowly at first, then, with increasing fluency as she allowed herself to process the events and emotions of the past 24 hours. "Today I realized that sharing our family photograph wasn't just about offering Christmas greetings to the public," she wrote. "It was about acknowledging that our private love and our public service are connected, that the strength we've found together as a family gives us the foundation we need to serve others, and that our service gains meaning from the genuine care we have for each other." She paused, thinking about the messages from the woman in Australia, the Scottish grandfather, the military family, and dozens of others. People don't need us to be perfect, she continued. They need us to be real. They need to see that love is possible, that families can overcome challenges, that happiness can coexist with responsibility and duty. The door opened quietly, and William appeared, carrying 2 cups of tea. He settled into the chair beside her desk, handing her one of the cups before taking a sip of his own. "What are you writing about?" he asked gently. "Today. The photograph." The response from people, Catherine replied, accepting the tea gratefully. "I'm trying to understand what happened, why that image connected with so many people in such a personal way." "I think it's because we told the truth," William said after a moment of consideration. "Not the whole truth, that would be impossible and inappropriate, but a true truth. We showed people who we really are when we're together, without pretense or performance." "The children handled it beautifully today," Catherine observed. "The attention at church, the comments from people along the walk. They seemed to understand that people were responding to something good. They're learning that sharing genuine parts of ourselves can be a form of service," William replied. "George especially seems to grasp that concept. He asked me today if the photograph helped people, and, when I said it seemed to, he looked relieved." Catherine smiled, thinking of their eldest son's growing awareness of his future responsibilities and his desire to use his position for positive purposes. "He's developing such a strong sense of service. It's beautiful to watch." "All 3 of them are," William agreed. "They're growing up with the understanding that love shared rather than hoarded becomes more powerful, not less." They sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, sipping their tea and watching the snow begin to fall outside the window. Tomorrow would bring the full ceremonial aspects of royal Christmas, the King's speech, the traditional Christmas Day service, the formal family gathering with all its protocols and obligations. But, tonight, Catherine felt a deep sense of satisfaction about the choices they had made and the response those choices had generated. "I want to write letters," she said suddenly, the idea forming as she spoke. "Personal thank you notes to some of the people who shared their stories with us after seeing the photograph. Not official responses from the palace, but personal notes from me." William looked at her with surprise and admiration. "That's a beautiful idea. It would mean a great deal to them." "I can't respond to everyone, that would be impossible," Catherine continued, her mind already organizing the logistics. "But there were some messages that particularly touched me, stories of people making difficult decisions to reach out to family members or find hope during challenging times. I'd like them to know that their responses mattered to us too." "The woman from Australia who called her sister?" William suggested. "Yes, and the grandfather from Scotland, and the single mother who wrote about finding hope," Catherine agreed. "Maybe a dozen letters, handwritten, acknowledging that sharing our photograph was meaningful for us too because of how people responded." It was an unusual step. Members of the royal family typically didn't engage in personal correspondence with members of the public beyond formal acknowledgements, but Catherine felt strongly that the depth and sincerity of the responses warranted something more personal. "We could work with the communications team to identify the most appropriate messages to respond to," William suggested, supporting her instinct while ensuring proper protocols were followed. Catherine nodded, already beginning to compose the letters in her mind. She wanted to acknowledge not just the kindness of people's responses, but the courage it had taken for some of them to share their own vulnerable family stories. The exchange had become a conversation about love and family and hope, rather than a one-way sharing of their holiday greetings. As they prepared to leave the study and join the rest of the family for a late evening drink by the fireplace, Catherine looked once more at her journal entry. The words reflected her growing understanding of how their public and private lives could work together rather than in competition with each other. The family photograph had been successful not because it was perfectly composed or professionally polished, but because it had been genuinely them, a family who had learned to love each other through challenges and who wanted to share that love with others who might need encouragement. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to serve, new responsibilities to fulfill, and new ways to demonstrate that duty and love could work together in beautiful, powerful ways. But, tonight, Catherine was grateful for the quiet moments of reflection, for the understanding that had emerged from the day's experiences, and for the knowledge that their family's openness had indeed served a larger purpose than their own happiness. The snow continued to fall outside the window, creating the perfect Christmas Eve scene that would greet them in the morning. Inside, surrounded by family and warmed by the knowledge that their love had reached far beyond their own circle, Catherine felt a profound sense of peace about who they were becoming and the legacy they were building together. Christmas Day at Sandringham dawned clear and bright, the snow from the previous evening having transformed the estate into a winter wonderland that looked as if it had been designed specifically for a royal Christmas card. Catherine woke early, as had become her habit, treasuring the quiet moments before the day's activities began in earnest. From her window, she could see the children already outside, still in their pajamas but wrapped in coats and boots, building what appeared to be a snow fort with military precision under Charlotte's direction. George was packing ammunition while Louis served as the enthusiastic but largely ineffective lookout. The sight filled Catherine with the same contentment she had felt looking at their family photograph. This was childhood as it should be, full of joy and imagination and the security that came from knowing they were loved unconditionally. William stirred beside her, following her gaze to the window and smiling at the scene unfolding in the garden below. "Should we be concerned that our daughter is displaying such advanced tactical planning skills?" he murmured. "Only if she starts recruiting the cousins," Catherine replied, laughing as Charlotte began directing her brothers in what looked like defensive positioning. "Though I suspect Mike and Zara's children would be enthusiastic participants." The morning passed in a blur of present opening, family breakfast, and the gentle chaos that came with gathering multiple families under one roof. Catherine watched her children interact with their cousins, noting how naturally they fell into their roles as both participants and leaders in the various games and activities that emerged. George had brought his new camera and was documenting everything with the serious attention of a professional photographer. Charlotte was teaching the younger cousins how to make paper snowflakes, her instructions delivered with patience and encouragement. Louis was simply happy to be part of the larger group, his laughter punctuating conversations and games throughout the morning. But it was during the quieter moments that Catherine found herself most moved. When she discovered George sitting with his great-aunt, listening intently as she shared stories about Christmases past. When Charlotte spontaneously hugged her grandfather after he helped her fix a broken ornament. When Louis climbed onto the Queen Consort's lap and fell asleep during the post-lunch lull, completely trusting and comfortable. These were the moments that reminded Catherine why the family photograph had resonated so deeply with people around the world. Love like this, uncomplicated, generous, resilient, was what people were hungry for in an increasingly complex world. The image they had shared wasn't just a Christmas greeting, it was evidence that such love still existed and could flourish even under the pressures of public life. The traditional Christmas Day service at St. Mary Magdalene provided another opportunity for Catherine to observe the power of authentic connection. The congregation included not just the royal family, but members of the local community who had attended this church for generations. Children peeked around pews to get glimpses of the princes and princess, but their curiosity was balanced by genuine warmth and respect. After the service, the traditional walkabout gave Catherine another chance to experience the ongoing response to their family photograph. Person after person mentioned the image, sharing how it had affected them or their own families. A young mother spoke about calling her own mother for the first time in months after seeing the photograph. An elderly gentleman mentioned showing it to his grandchildren and using it as a conversation starter about the importance of family loyalty. "Your picture reminded me why I work so hard to keep our family together," said a woman who appeared to be about Catherine's age, her voice thick with emotion. "Sometimes you need to see other families who've made it work to remember that it's possible." Each interaction reinforced Catherine's growing understanding of the responsibility that came with their position, not just to fulfill official duties, but to model the kind of relationships and values that could inspire and encourage others. The family photograph had become a touchstone for conversations about love, commitment, forgiveness, and hope. Back at Sandringham House, the afternoon unfolded with the relaxed rhythm of family time. The adults settled into comfortable conversation while the children engaged in increasingly elaborate games that involved multiple rooms and complex rules that seemed to evolve by the minute. Catherine found herself moving between groups, contributing to adult conversations about upcoming engagements and royal business while also serving as occasional referee for the children's activities. The King's Christmas broadcast, recorded earlier in the month, was watched by the entire family gathered in the sitting room. Catherine listened to his words about service, community, and the enduring power of love to overcome division and difficulty. She thought about how their family photograph had become an unexpected illustration of those themes, a simple image that had sparked conversations about reconciliation and hope across the globe. As evening approached, Catherine found herself in the kitchen with several of the other women in the family, helping to prepare the elaborate Christmas dinner that was Sandringham tradition. The work was shared easily, with conversations flowing between light-hearted family gossip and more serious discussions about the year ahead. "The response to your photograph has been quite extraordinary," Princess Anne observed as she helped Catherine arrange vegetables on serving platters. The palace communications team mentioned that messages are still arriving from around the world. "It's been overwhelming in the best possible way," Catherine replied. "We had hoped it might bring some Christmas joy to people, but the depth of personal connection has been beyond anything we anticipated. You've given people permission to hope," and said with her characteristic directness. "In a year that's been difficult for many families, you've shown that love and stability are possible. That's not a small gift." The dinner itself was magnificent, with the formal dining room filled with family conversation that ranged from politics to sports to the children's school activities. Catherine watched her own children navigate the mix of formality and family warmth that characterized these gatherings, noting how comfortable they had become with the dual nature of their lives. After dinner, as the evening wound down and the younger children were prepared for bed, Catherine found herself alone with the king in his study. He had requested a few minutes of private conversation, and she settled into the chair across from his desk with curiosity about what he wanted to discuss. "I wanted to speak with you about the photograph," he began, his expression thoughtful. "Not just the public response, though that has been remarkable, but what it represents about the monarchy's evolution." Catherine waited, sensing that he had something specific he wanted to convey. "For generations, we've maintained our position through distance and mystique," he continued. "People respected the crown because it seemed elevated above ordinary human experience. But you and William are proving that respect can also come from recognition, from people seeing something familiar and admirable in your family relationships. We've tried to be authentic while still maintaining appropriate boundaries," Catherine replied carefully. "It's not always easy to know where those lines should be drawn." "You're finding your way," the king assured her. "And, in doing so, you're helping to secure the monarchy's future relevance. People need to see that our family values align with theirs, that our commitment to service grows out of genuine love and care for each other and for the country." The conversation continued for several more minutes, touching on plans for the coming year and Catherine's growing role in shaping the modern monarchy's approach to public engagement. But it was his initial observation that stayed with her as she made her way back to join the family, the idea that authenticity could be a form of service, that showing their genuine love for each other could strengthen rather than weaken their effectiveness as representatives of the crown. Later that evening, as she and William prepared for bed, Catherine reflected on the unexpected journey that had begun with a simple decision to share a family photograph. What had started as a Christmas greeting had become a catalyst for conversations about family, love, forgiveness, and hope that had reached around the world. "Do you think we made the right choice?" she asked William as they settled into bed, the day's activities finally concluded. "I think we made an honest choice," he replied, taking her hand in the darkness. "We shared something real about who we are, and people responded to that honesty. The fact that it's encouraged others to reach out to their own families, to forgive old hurts, to choose hope over cynicism, that suggests it was exactly the right choice. Catherine squeezed his hand, thinking about the letters she planned to write to some of the people who had shared their stories in response to the photograph. Tomorrow would bring new responsibilities and new opportunities to serve, but tonight she was grateful for the knowledge that their family's love had indeed reached beyond their own circle to touch lives in ways they were only beginning to understand. The snow continued to fall outside their window, and Catherine drifted off to sleep thinking about all the families around the world who might be looking at their photograph and finding in it some small measure of hope or encouragement. It had been, she realized, the most meaningful Christmas of her life, not because of the gifts or the gatherings, but because of the unexpected ways their private love had been able to serve a larger purpose. In sharing who they truly were as a family, they had discovered that authenticity itself could be a gift to others. And, in the quiet of Christmas night at Sandringham, surrounded by the people she loved most, Catherine felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought them to this moment of understanding and peace.